Are you overcomplicating sales? Well, on this episode, I'm going to show you how you can uncomplicate it and earn more money. Hello, Sales Nation. Welcome to today's episode of the Salesman Podcast. On today's show, we have Aaron Schmookler. He is a team selling expert. You can find out more about him over at theyesworks.com. And on today's show, we're diving into sales, why we're overcomplicating it, how we can make it something that we do with the buyer, we collaborate with them rather than selling at them, or something that we do to them, and how that translates into more deals closed. So with all that said, let's jump straight in. Aaron, welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you, Will.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you on, mate. It's exciting to hear that you've listened to some of the show as well. And so I imagine your insights are going to be even more crystal clear for our audience and even more niche down. So I appreciate that. And on today's show, I want to reframe sales in the heads of probably 50% of the audience of it's to have success over it long term. It's not something that you do to someone. It is something that you do with someone. It's a collaboration. It's not a string of manipulation tactics to get them to sign off on the order. Because clearly,
like when done well.
Yeah, but yeah, because even if you were good at doing the manipulation side of things, you've only got a short window to crush it and earn a load of money. Because with buyer's remorse, with bad customers, with the feedback that people can give you online, clearly it's not sustainable. So this effort into building collaboration with customers, that's what I want the premise of the show to be, and that's where I'm sure we're going to end up. But Aaron, just to get us started, we talk about all these things. Are we overcomplicating sales? Even with that opening statement I just made, are we overcomplicating it? Is it as simple as that the buyer buys from people that they know, like, and trust? Is it as simple as that?
Yes and no. I think we are overcomplicating sales in that there's a system of sales that people have got to follow, and there are scripts that people have got to follow. I don't want to get me wrong that I don't approve of systems or scripts. I have my own systems and scripts that I lean on heavily, but what I don't do is rely on them or stick to them, because people are not automatons. The people that we are trying to sell to are not automatons. And so to address them as automatons ourselves is really to miss the mark. So in these complicated systems that can't be diverted from, yes, I would say we're overcomplicating sales. But in practicing sales on rails, like we're a train that can't be stopped and can't be diverted, we are simplifying sales. It's necessary to be able to respond to what's in front of us in real time, and to throw our system out, throw our script out, divert from that system, divert from the script, and be able to come back, all based on what we're getting from the person sitting opposite us. And that person is a collaborator. Going into a collaboration, a true collaboration, you have no idea what's going to happen. So you have no idea what's called for from you.
I think you've just touched on something here, which it'll be a smaller percentage of our audience who are mainly doing B2B complex sales. But anyone who is on the phone using a script, saying it verbatim because they've been told that it works and stick to the script, surely they're just going to be engineered out by a computer program that sounds just like a real human being who can do simple yes-no calculations. Within 18 months, 2 years, that must be possible to implement.
I think that the notion that salespeople, even people who are not doing complex sales, is oversold. Certainly a lot of sales in the B2C world has gone that way, has gone the way of the literal automaton. And that trend is not going to stop anytime soon or reverse. But there is always going to be room for, a couple of friends of mine who I talk about with sales with often are mechanics. There are still going to be services, things that are where there's enough diversity in the product line that being able to speak to an expert and share what's going on in your life and in your family and all of these sorts of things that make you, Will, different from me, Aaron, and your life and your needs different from mine, those things are still going to call for human interaction for a long time to come.
I get it. Maybe I pitched that question wrongly, but is there a divergence here between people who are just following a script? Do you not think that, and we'll leave this behind in a second, but do you not think that they can just be replaced? Do you think that you always need someone to read a script, even if they're doing it verbatim? Do you think that humans can just tell that and it can't be replaced by a voice activation system that just understands somewhat context and so can refer answers? And I can't remember what it's called, but essentially whoever's law it is was beaten a decade ago of over text of whether you could suss out whether it's a human or a bot. But then even more so, and because I'm experimenting with this at the moment with getting content in front of our audience, of chatbots. I think most people, rather than getting on the phone and sitting and waiting for a kind of a real human being, or even sitting and waiting in a queue to speak to some kind of quote unquote artificial intelligence, would probably rather just get on the phone, text chat to someone and have their problem solved. Do you not think that is going to just take away a huge chunk of this less complex, more B2C sales?
Probably. Yeah. When you talk about less complex, probably so. But then there are always going to be people like me who chafe at AI. Not that I chafe at AI in every circumstance.
Do you really? Go on. I'm
not
intrigued.
in every circumstance, but
yeah.
For example, I mean, customer service and sales are pretty closely related, and
sure.
Customer service and sales are getting closer and closer together. So I remember a time not long ago when I was talking to my internet provider. I was on the phone talking to a tech support person, and after 5 minutes of being on the phone with him, I actually started to wonder, is this an incredibly sophisticated piece of AI? And I asked him if he was human, and he said yes. And I wasn't sure whether I believed him because it's so easy to get bogged down and get confused. It's so easy for a bot to think you're asking one thing when in fact you're telling it something else. It's so easy to lay out, this is what I know, please pick up from there, rather than going through 5 minutes of stuff I already know. That's going to chafe for people forever. And so even speaking with real live humans who are going through their support tree can really be irritating. If they can't go, okay, this person is not having it with my support tree, or this person is not having it with my decision-making tree. There are people who want to tell stories. There are people whose stories will influence what car is better for them than another, what level of support is going to be better than another. So certainly a large chunk of Salesforce is going to and has already gone to the bots, and there's always going to be a call for real humans to help make decisions.
I think we're saying the same thing, because I totally agree in that there's our world, complex B2B sales, it's very unlikely it's going to be replaced by anything soon. And if it does, then all hell is going to break loose, because we won't be talking to anyone anymore, and people will be having relationships with bots and all kinds of stuff, and it'll get super creepy and weird. So that's probably the bigger, more desperate thing to think about in times when those times come. But I totally agree. I think
it's also important to note that we make buying decisions emotionally. We don't, even for little things like your writing implement. We make emotional decisions about what to buy. I wrote with a fountain pen because I loved the romance of it for a really long time. And then it wasn't until people kind of told me that they were having trouble reading my handwriting that I finally said, okay, I've got to go back to something else where my handwriting is going to be better. And there are always going to be humans. It takes a human to tap into that emotional root.
That is a really fascinating example, because when I think of it, I write in, this is just a cheap pad, but over there, which I do all my writing in for my diary, the bullet journal that I use, I use a moleskin or moleskine, however you want to pronounce it. And I also use these, and I'm going to give them a shout out because I've used these pens for years. The Uniball I Fine by Mitsubishi Pencil. They're about £3 each, and they're incredible to write with. And this is just such a stupid, subtle, tactile. It's probably why AI will eventually take over and just kill us all because we're wrapped up in all these stupid emotional ties to things. But it's such a nice experience to be writing in the journal as I'm doing it, and it improves my handwriting as well because my handwriting is terrible. I don't know, but I wasn't making comments on yours, but mine is terrible. So let's move on from this then to when we are on the phone, when we are engaging with people. How do we tie in these emotions?
Let me just jump in real quick and just say that one of the things that I just did that an AI would never be able to do is that even though on my screen that pen that you just waxed rhapsodic about, right? I could recognize it even in just a few pixels. I'm really familiar with that pen, and most people who use that pen are people who love pens. And so that was the example that I came to illustrate to you and to the listeners why it is that humans matter in sales and will always matter in sales. Because I managed to tap into something emotional for you based on a few pixels. And so far, computers can't touch that. They wouldn't have recognized it. They wouldn't have made that association that it's a...
They certainly could recognize this pen. They certainly could then do a contextual search of people talk about this pen very highly, and then they could come back to go, there's no reason why this couldn't happen right now, never mind what we can even conceive in kind of like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. They could then come back and say, oh, are you into... I don't know what it's called, being a pen nerd, but are you into whatever the equivalent of like an audio file? Are you into that? So that fascinates me because, and they could then in an instant look through all your Facebook content, all the contextual content that's online for you as an individual, and I think there'll be a disconnect there between if you know you're speaking to a bot, you know that they're trying to game you. Which is perhaps the difference, the underlying subtlety of it all, of you know that you're not speaking to a real person. But if you put if you lied to your potential customers and you give them this service and you said it was a real person, I honestly don't think, and this is totally off topic for what I want to talk about, so we'll bring it back on track in a second, but it's fascinating to me because I think there's going to be huge changes in the market as this like rolls out. But I honestly don't think I think the subtlety is going to be so subtle that if you're in a rush and you just want a problem solving, it's going to be unnoticeable.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
Fair enough.
And that's,
okay.
that if matters. If you're in a rush, if you don't care, right?
Sure. So maybe that's the distinction. That's the differentiator. So okay. So let's pull it back on track. So we want to have a phone conversation. We know that we don't want to be on script totally. We know that we want to have the ability of improvisation as we are having these conversations. We need to know that we've got industry knowledge, we've got vertical knowledge, we've got knowledge inside us that can add value to the customer as we're going through these conversations. And that's our piece of the puzzle. That's what we're here to do as sales professionals, to facilitate the sale and to guide people along with insights that AI may or may not be able to fill out with in the not too distant future. So with that said, is there a process for improvisation? Is there a process of when this happens, we now go off track and we move away from the script? Or is it just practice and experience which allows us to have this flexibility?
I would say I'm going to make a distinction between process and system, right? So in a process, there are specific steps to follow one after the other. A system is perhaps more interdependent. There's more of a web of principles. So theater improvisers use a very specific system of principles, starting with something like, celebrating failure. That's a principle. We're going to celebrate failure, not because failure is itself wonderful, but because celebrating failure is useful. If you celebrate failure, you can learn from it. If you celebrate failure, you can keep going after you've experienced it, rather than feeling down in the dumps and having to work yourself up to overcome the call resistance again. But if you celebrate failure, it's you go through one failed call on to the next. That's one principle. Another principle is the idea that I've got your back, Will, right? This is your show. I'm here to provide value to your listeners so that your show's value is increased and continues to have the high standards that you've had for it. I'm here to have your back. And in so doing, we create a rapport. Another principle is, and this is a really important one, it's never about the thing. It's always about the relationship. And that's something a bot is never going to be able to do, is we will get to business. If what I'm selling is the same thing that you need, we can always get to business. But if I do things that deteriorate the relationship, the sale is going to be compromised. And if I'm the only one selling it and you really need it and there's nothing else comparable in the marketplace, maybe I'll make the sale anyway. But that's a lot to ask, right? That when with so many people selling commodities, with so much that whether commoditized or not is similar to what's next door, if we're not establishing a relationship, if the relationship doesn't come first, then we're in trouble in the long term. I've had things sold to me by very skilled salespeople that I didn't need. I needed something. My something that I needed was related to what they offered. And so through going through a series of manipulations and probably blinders, they were able to convince me that their product was in fact the right choice for me. Now it's pretty hard for me not just to think about doing business with them in the future, but even it's hard for me to think about recommending them to others who definitely need what they're offering, because it matters to me who I recommend and what that relationship is going to be like. And if I feel like I can count on that business, that salesperson, that operation to manipulate my contacts, it's going to be hard for me to make the recommendation, even if the needs and the product align perfectly.
How do we know? And this is quite an open, wide question. How do we know when we are truly being there for the customer to build a relationship versus that we're just trying to sell them something? And what I mean by that is there's a lot of people listening to this now who, you know, their job is to drive revenue. That's what they're employed for. So morally within that company, you've got to close the deals that are in front of you. You're getting compensated for closing deals. And so subtly, you could probably brainwash yourself if you tried that closing the right deal, that you're closing the deal with the right person every single time, even if it's not, even if you are being manipulative, it's coming from perhaps not a place of you being a horrible person and having poor morals and ripping people off. You've talked yourself around otherwise. But how do you know whether it is the right fit and it is going to flourish into a long-term relationship? How are you certain of that?
The language that we use reflects our inner thinking, whether we want it to or not. And I believe my friend Bill Caskey from the Advanced Selling Podcast was on your show.
Yep.
And he and I are aligned in a lot of ways. And so I would take exception with a few of the things that you just said. For example, if you look at your job as a salesperson as I must close the deals in front of me, then you can be certain that at least some percentage of the time, you're not going to be closing the right deals, that you are going to be manipulating people. You will. It's just plain math. That if your intent, if your purpose is to close the deal, you are going to align your behavior in order to achieve that objective. If, however, your objective, your true purpose, your true intent is to help the other person, is to support their success, then you may find that you disqualify a higher percentage of the people who you are in front of. I also think that the numbers bear out that you will close a higher percentage of the people in front of you as well, because they are going to feel, whether they know it or not, they are going to intuit. And I don't think of intuition as some kind of woo-woo thing out there. It's the subtle ways in which our brains are able to make meaning of tremendous amounts of information. And when we're face-to-face with somebody, even on the phone with someone, then we feel, we take in so much information. So if my purpose, Will, is to really support you, and I'm trying to sell to you, if I'm trying to help you rather than feeling like I must close this business, you will intuit a difference between me and my competition, because 9 out of 10 salespeople out there are out there to close the deal. And you don't give a crap about my quota. You give a crap about your success. You give a crap about your numbers. You give a crap about the ease of your business life. And if that's what I'm there to support, you're going to trust me, because I'm actually trustworthy.
This goes back, beyond what we think of selling. There's I can tell that you've not to describe you as a deep guy, but I can tell from the language you're using that you've been put plenty of thought into a lot of this. So I'm going to dodge this subject of money, because that's something that we could dive into at a whole deeper level of the meaning that people give to it versus what it is, which is an exchange of value. So dodge that for a second. And if we go to history before money, when all these subtle cues, when people are selling now, that we all observe, that we all take on board, that the gut feeling that we get from it, that would have originated from multiple tribes, someone going from one tribe to another, and then you've got to instantly decipher whether they're here to murder you all in your sleep, or whether they're here to kind of add to the, even to the point of add the genes to your tribe to make it more resilient to kind of like bacteria, disease, and everything else that's around you. So it's almost like by manipulation and all the weird tactics that a lot of people are aware of, and whether people use them or not is down for debate, whether it's a moral issue or whether it's them telling themselves that they're using them because they've got a great product customer fit and it's their duty to close the deal, so they're going to use manipulation tactics to make that happen, rightly or wrongly. They are using tactics that are based on essentially millions of years of evolution, right?
If I follow your question, I think perhaps yes. So if we look at, like, there are these schools of sales that will tell you to mirror the body language, to mirror the pace, to mirror the other person. Now, that is a manipulation. And what it is when you mirror the other person, you're telling their brain, I am like you. I am feeling affinity with you. There are these deep-seated roots in the brain that see somebody mirroring us, and what they feel is, this person's interests are aligned with mine. It's a hack, essentially. Mm-hmm. And that reminds me of a Facebook post that I saw someone in my feed 2 or 3 days ago that said, I hate salespeople and I am one. To paraphrase it, I don't remember exactly what it said. There are a lot of people out there who are salespeople who are burning out, who have burned out and can never go back to sales, who are self-hating salespeople. Unless you're a sociopath, manipulating people wears on you.
Yeah. It's like lying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It wears on you, and you start to feel worn down. Now, can you be successful mirroring people deliberately? Yes, sure. For a while. Until they recognize that you've manipulated them, and then they post online about the manipulative sales tactics that your company uses and that you use, and they tell their friends to steer clear, and you stop getting repeat and referral business. They don't renew their subscription. Instead, they move on to the competition. And you yourself are manipulating person after person. You feel less and less affinity with your fellow human being. By the way, we are creatures of habit. So you go to work and you manipulate people at work and in order to get your way, and you go home and you manipulate your loved ones, and they start to resent you, and you're resented away from home, and you're resented at home, and you resent yourself. And so you tell me, to me, the ROI isn't there. By contrast, if you go and you actually align yourself with the person sitting across from you, you actually look into their eyes and wish them well. You listen truly to the troubles that they may be having at work. What are the problems? What are their aspirations? And by the way, any gap between an aspiration and reality is a problem. You don't have to look necessarily for pain points. You just look for gaps between aspirations and the present reality, and you really decide. And this is a choice you can make. You can decide to care about that gap and want to help them close it. And guess what happens? You start to mirror them naturally. But instead of going home and feeling like I manipulated that person, you go home and you feel like I was of value today. I helped people today. I aligned myself with my fellow human being today. And they also, by the way, go out and tell their friends. It's like, boy, I just met this salesperson and we had this great conversation about my dreams and aspirations, about the problems that I'm having in my business. And I can't remember the last time I had such a valuable conversation. In fact, they gave me 3 suggestions that I'm going to put into practice tomorrow that were absolutely totally free and are going to make my life better, my business life easier, and I think they're probably going to improve my bottom line. All that for free. I wonder if we're going to do business. I haven't quite decided about their product yet. But then when the phone rings, when they look down at their caller ID and see that it's you, they're not going to let it go to voicemail because you might have more value to offer them today. And when you pick up the phone, you're not going to take a deep breath and think to yourself, okay, am I going to get hung up on today? Am I going to get shouted at today? Is this going to be another no in my pile of no's? You're going to pick up the phone and look forward to speaking with your prospect because your prospect is going to be looking forward to speaking with you.
Sales are going through rapid change at the moment. Is it because of what you just said then? Of one, people are becoming aware of the people are becoming more self-aware. They are less open to having someone tell them what to do, and then they do it for 10 years, then they get a golden watch, and then they get a promotion. And I've just done a recording about millennials, and this kind of came up in that conversation. But I don't think this is a societal shift as opposed to a generational shift in thinking. So is sales changing rapidly because one, people are coming to the conclusions what you just described of doing business the right way is sustainable over the long term and makes me feel less like a scumbag. But then is it also being driven by two, as you described then, which is happening more and more, this feedback loop of the internet that doesn't allow people to manipulate and screw people over for too long, because then in the search engine results, your name starts cropping up with product reviews and things of that nature that they're going to stop you getting your next job. It's as simple as that. Do you think sales is changing rapidly because of those two things, or is there something else that's driving that this change to what you're describing, which is not being a dick and doing business as we would like, doing business to other people as we would like it to be done to us?
I think the answer to your question is yes. If people with the kind of mindset that I espouse, and there are more and more of us out there in sales, if we could teleport ourselves back in time, we would crush it. These things are these principles that make good sales are not new. However, there are two things driving the kind of change that you're talking about. One is information. Information has always been what drives change. Information is the stuff of change. And we are now in the information age where information is widely available, increasingly available. The pace of information is tremendous, right? You and I will get off this this recording and I'll tweet about it or something like that, right? And so everybody who's on my Twitter feed will have access to the information that Will and I just recorded this podcast. So there's and if you're trying to sell to me and you try to screw me over, I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to get on Yelp. And the next people who are thinking about buying from you are going to look on Yelp and they're going to see my review, right? So that information drives change, and the pace of information drives accelerating change. And human contact has always worked. I think about recent experiences that I've had buying cars, right? And car salesmen, bless you all, right, are notorious for being manipulative, particularly used car salesmen. And I personally am a used car buyer. It's hard for me to
Me too.
put down a lot of cash
bucket, yeah.
and watch it evaporate in the split second that it takes me to cross the threshold onto the paved road, right, instead of the parking lot. But they're notorious for being ham-fisted, for being checked out, for being manipulative. And every experience that I'd ever had was somewhere on that spectrum. And so I just kind of assumed that's how used car sales happen, right? I'm not going to have a different experience. I'm going to have to just deal with that every time I buy a car. And then a few years ago, I bought a Volkswagen from a Lexus dealer in Tacoma, Washington, and my experience got turned on its ear because this guy, Steve, was incredible. I walked in, his first greeting to me was totally different from any car salesman greeting I'd ever had. It was the same words. It was pretty close to the same voice, same tone of voice, but there was somebody home. And he was somehow talking to me like a human being. And every experience that I had from then on was exactly the same. I said, great, I've got one more of these that I want to drive this afternoon, and then I'm going to make a decision. And he said, get this. Well, let me ask you, Will, what do you expect a used car salesman to say in that circumstance?
It would be something along the terms of giving you a discount or an ultimatum, or the car might not be there when you get back, or something to stop you leaving them.
Or what is it going to take to put you in a car today, right? All of those things are what I expected him to say, and I was gearing up for the battle, right? Or to just turn around and walk out while he shouted after me. Instead, he said, okay. And it blew my mind, right? The moral of the story, or the end of the story anyway, is that I bought the car from him. And 3 days later, I realized probably the other car was the better car to buy. And at the same time, I didn't look back. I had no buyer's remorse. I was like, you know what? That other car was the better car. It had a sunroof, which I really wanted, and the car that I bought did not. And I think, day after day, I would have had a better emotional experience in my car, just the car itself. But I am so glad to have given him his commission check. And the next time I was looking for a car, he was the first person that I called. I said, hey, Steve, it's Aaron Schmookler again. I'm looking for a car. Here's what I'm looking for. If you see anything, give me a call. I have never felt any loyalty to a car salesman before, but that attitude changed my experience, and I'm never going back.
I've got a very similar story. I've covered it on the show before, and I know the salesperson up here in the Northwest in the UK got some deals out of it, so I'm not going to plug him any more than I have to. But he sold a car to my dad, and it was how to describe it, like a car, I think in the States it's a similar thing, but a car supermarket. So rather than just a Ford dealer or Porsche dealer or whatever it is, lots of different cars, lots of different ages, but all essentially relatively new kind of thing. So my dad and I rock up. I welcomed at the door by the kind of like the main manager, the GM or whatever his title was. He was a very interesting guy. Got introduced to essentially the salesperson, and it was, hey, every car has a number on the front of it. If you want any information, grab the number, come back, and we can have a sit and chat about it. And then he was just like, if you want a coffee, come and let me know, and I'll grab you one. And that was it. He was very knowledgeable about the car that we ended up looking at, this Ford. went back and forth with him, and then I started explaining about the podcast, and I was talking to him about this is, so far the service has been very good, and he was explaining he's commissioned on the customer feedback of people who bought from him, as opposed to how many cars he sells per week, month, or however it's done in the used car sales world. And not clearly, how can I describe it? That role then is somewhat systematized, so perhaps that isn't the place for someone who is interested in dealing with a complex B2B sale that might go over 6 months, 12 months. They are separate in the amount of skill, insights, and obviously then financial rewards for that go into the two. But he was a young lad and he was doing well for himself. And so, of course, then we gave him a great review. I told everyone about it because the experience, is similar to yourself, was so unique and different to any car that I've ever bought or my dad has ever bought in the past. And I know because he got mentioned on the podcast, he got business out of it. He emailed me about it. And one of my dad's best friends bought a car the next sodding day. That's how impressed he was that he shared this. He literally went the next day, and because he was procrastinating on replacing his car for numerous reasons, but one of them was that he didn't want to get hounded by a bunch of salespeople. And this car supermarket allowed him to test drive multiple cars and like back to back and things of that nature as well. So there's other benefits to their service, but they had a fantastic result from it. So what I want to ask you now, I want to wrap up the show with this, Aaron, is that short term, you might close more deals. Tell me if I'm right or wrong with this assumption from the conversation that we've had. Short term, by using weird manipulation tactics, by going in kind of the bull in China shop and just trying to crush it and close everyone and get every lead, you might close more deals, very short term. But am I right in thinking that over the long term, this all starts to compound of customers come back to you in the B2B world? It might not be this because they need a new car, but it's because they're now they've gone from marketing manager to senior director of marketing or VP of marketing at another company, so they've got more budget. So that customer comes back to you, and then they recommend it, so more people come back to you, and over the longer term, you win. Am I right in saying that short term, yes, weird business techniques might play somewhat of an advantage, but over the longer term, when your reputation comes into it, when you're online, when you're branding, which is we're all building a personal brand online, whether we like it or not at the moment, with the way that Google searches work and LinkedIn data feed works. Over the long term, am I right in saying that is the way to win in sales?
Yes, absolutely. And I would add that with this mindset that I'm suggesting, right? It's always about the relationship. It's never about the thing. I've got your back. That also what happens is that you end up with a sales team that is a team. Sales team is usually a misnomer. It's a bunch of sales individuals with the same supervisor, right? But the sales team starts to pull together, and the gap between the highest performers and the lowest performers starts to close. Not because the highest performers start to tank, but because they are supporting the lower performers, and the lower performers are becoming inspired. And the people don't take as many sick days because they're not as beat down by their own practices of manipulation. And as well, we live in this age of data. And when you're telling your story about the car supermarket where the salesperson gets a commission based on his ratings as a service person instead of on commission, that sounds scary, right? Even I was sitting here thinking, how do you track and how do you figure out whether this is working or not? Because before the age of data, you're just kind of looking at the bottom line, and you're looking at the sales versus, you're just looking kind of straight revenue versus expenses. But now, with the way that computer data can be generated, I guarantee you that car supermarket is doing big time, big data. And they're comparing his ratings to his sales numbers. And they're generating so much data about what it is that drives sales. Revenue is a lagging indicator, right? If you're tracking revenue, then you know how much you sold. But if you're tracking something like customer service satisfaction, or if you're tracking how How much energy does your salesperson have coming in the beginning of the day? How much smile do they have? These are actually data points that could potentially be tracked, that are leading indicators of success. How many calls are they making? How much time does it take for them to overcome the sales resistance before they pick up the phone again? These are leading indicators of sales, and I promise you that this more human way of selling drives those leading indicators up. And we're going to see more and more data to support the idea that selling as a human being instead of selling as an automaton, selling to support and help rather than selling to close the deal, these things are going to show huge returns as the data comes in.
Amazing stuff. Well, with that, Aaron, I've got one final question to ask everyone that comes on the show, and we'll wrap up with this. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
Great. Well, I remember being a realtor, and I was terrible at it. Because I would go into a networking situation and I would look around the room at all of this fresh meat and just hate myself. Right? The fact that I was looking around the room at this fresh meat, both I felt dirty. It also increased my resistance to going and talking to people, which I think you can probably tell I enjoy in most circumstances. Then I would actually go out into my social life and feel like everybody out in my social life was also a potential prospect. And so then my social life became unenjoyable. And I just felt like I'm terrible at this sales stuff. I don't know how to begin these conversations. My supervisors were saying things like, just go and add value. And I didn't know what the heck that meant. And they couldn't define it for me. If someone had been able to say to me, Aaron, look, it's simple. Just go and be you and enjoy the people that you come in contact with and help them if you can. And if how you can help them is to refer them to the Salesman Podcast, do that. And if how you can help them is to simply tell them that you can relate to the troubles that they're having and that they're not alone, do that. And if what you can do to help them is to help them sell their home, then make that offer as well. It reminds me of trying to talk to an attractive woman, right? If I would have a lot of trouble just going up to an attractive woman simply because I found her attractive and would like to know her better. However, the minute, she drops something, is a piece of cake to go and say, hey, I think you dropped this, to go and help her and to be a human in her presence. If someone had said, those skills that you have at being with people, that's what it's all about. Go and help people. That's what it means to be of value. Instead of find them coupons for frozen yogurt, which was one of the recommendations I was given as a realtor. That's a way you can add value in your emails, which just seemed so odd to me. If somebody had said to me, you are enough, go be you, engage with human beings and relate to human beings, find affinity with human beings, and enjoy yourself, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now because I'd be making a killing as a realtor.
I love it. I'm going to hold myself back from asking this question of, are we all suckers for making life too hard for ourselves, rather than, because what you just described, a lot of that was, it's fundamental traits of success that dates back to Stoic times or Stoic philosophies of doing business and engaging and communicating and politics. So I'll hold back, because we'll have you back on the show to dive into this further, because it's all right. I like
I'm
these episodes.
I'm going to hold back then too on answering that question.
I like these. Well, I'm just conscious of time as well, and I like these episodes because they go beyond sales, and the whole premise of the show is to help people just thrive in everything that they're doing, and obviously take the sales twist on it. But I think there's a lot of value in this one. And with that, Aaron, if everyone who wants to learn more about you and everything that you're doing, tell us where we can find out you and the website as well.
Yeah, well, you can find me on LinkedIn, Aaron Schmookler, and I promise I'm the only one there. You can find me also at our website, which is theyesworks.com, where we offer training to teams to communicate and collaborate effectively. and where we offer training to sales teams to turn, as you opened our show with, where we help turn sales from something you do to people to something you do in collaboration with people.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to all that in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with that, Aaron, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for kind of going back and forth with me as well at the beginning of the show about AI and your thoughts on because it will come at some point, I'm convinced, but time frames of this, I'd probably go on your recommendation and your insights rather than mine, having just glossed over it and read headlines on the subject. So I appreciate going back and forth with me on that, mate. And I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Will, I had a really good time. Thanks so much.